This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
The shaping of the art and culture began then with Stalin. He used that as basically a tool, a weapon to brainwash the masses and have them believe that communism can offer them, hope and bring them all the things that they always want to have in their lives.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Vanessa Rios Gomez. In this podcast, we continue our series on communism in the Soviet Union. You'll hear America Daily's Mark Jackson on how communism sabotages and abuses fine art. He reads from the Epoch Times series called How the Communist Spectre is Ruling Our World.
Great works of art transmit heritage, disseminate knowledge and wisdom, and fortify character. They hold exalted positions in the great civilizations of the East and West. Since art has such a tremendous effect on changing society, it's not surprising that communism uses art in its aim of socially engineering man. A. Art in communist countries. Communist parties know the power of art and use it to brainwash people and turn all art forms into tools to advance their brainwashing. Many people have ridiculed the CCP for having singers and actors as military generals. They wonder how civilians who have neither undergone military training nor been trained in arms or warfare could be qualified to be generals. The CCP believes that the people in such roles are just as important as trained military men in promoting and upholding the communist cult. Perhaps they are even more crucial. In this sense, their military rank is perfectly in conformance with party principle. As Mao Zedong said, quote, "We must also have a cultural army, which is absolutely indispensable for uniting our own ranks and defeating the enemy." Artistic performances in communist countries are designed to have people forget the miseries they suffer under communist rule and to cultivate their loyalty to the party through art. This propaganda effect, called thought work, cannot be achieved by mere martial power. If orthodox art that was close to the divine and promoted traditional values were to exist simultaneously with party-controlled art used for brainwashing the public, then the latter would lose its monopoly and have no effect. This is why all communist countries have a strict censorship system for the arts and the publishing industry.
We are also welcoming back Mrs. Yulia Tullar. She's an expat from the Soviet Union. She'll be giving us some insights into the art world and how Soviet Russians viewed and utilized art to further their so-called communist utopia. Mrs. Tullar is an artist, having studied fine art at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee.
There was a big shift in the understanding and use of the arts in Russia from the Tsars and the Orthodox Church to then Lenin and his Marxist beliefs. And this is after Lenin allegedly had the Romanov family killed in 1918 so he could grab the reins of the country and turn it into a Marxist communist utopia. What role did the traditional fine arts play in Russia before Lenin's revolution?
So the three most important elements in artistic creation are representation, creation, and communication. And so all artistic creations contain a theme. That is the message that author seeks to communicate, regardless of the art form. So it could be a poem, it could be a painting, a statue, photography, novel, play, dance, or film. And artist is trying to deliver the theme to parts of the reader, listener, or viewer. And so this function of communication was really important. And it was important all throughout the world. So the traditional art forms that, especially during High Renaissance, they carried that very function. And so in Russia, the art forms that I'm familiar with, actually the traditional art, I wasn't be able to see it because it's not widely available. It's not like you can go to the gallery here in the United States or you can go to museum and see things. You have to actually travel to a larger city, like let's say Moscow or St. Petersburg or some others, to be able to see the works. So a lot of people, myself included, were not familiar with all these works. The traditional artworks, and not everyone they had a privilege to travel back then because the traveling was expensive. But I know that a lot of listeners can relate to. There's works. Russians were famous for their beautiful iconography in icon making. Back then, Russia was very religious, and so we had beautiful old churches and cathedrals that were filled with iconography. Just large oil paintings of saints and Jesus Christ and Saint Mary. Big walls were assembled and they were painted in old tradition. So some were done in tempera and then in gold leafed, some were done in oil painting. So a lot of people actually in the old Russia, traditional Russia, knew about art through religion and by going to churches and by participating in services in those cathedrals and small churches all throughout the country, and that's how they learned about art. Russia was not a key country when it came to art world like Italy, so they were not in the same level as Italian artists like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, or others.
When talking about traditional Russian art before the Communist Revolution in 1917, it sounds like it was primarily used for people to express their faith and understanding of the world. When Lenin came in, the role of art shifted.
Right, and as far as it's interesting. So before Russian Revolution in 1913, what happened is things started to change. Actually, before that, but at that time, because there were so many shifts and movements in the country, the people were moving to the cities. The czars and later temporary government was trying to create an industry in the cities so that people were moving in, because Russia is really known for its agriculture. Primarily, there was just agricultural country. So there was not much of an industry there, and all of a sudden, all these new elements begin to be introduced. So the cities are being built, people moving to the cities, and from that, a new art movement came. It was called constructivism. So, which means to construct, and it was initiated by Vladimir Tatlin. And this was basically the rejection of the idea of autonomous art. And instead, art was to be used for social purposes, primarily to promote the ideas of proletariat. And constructivism had a great effect on modern art movements of the 20th century across the world. So its influence was widespread with major effects upon architecture, sculpture, graphic design, industrial design, theater, film, dance, fashion, and to some extent even music. So after the revolution of 1917 and death of Lenin, so Stalin took over and he understood the power of art and used its influence to basically change the country. So first thing he did is he got rid of the constructivism, because constructivist movements, maybe some listeners know, a famous painting by Malevich, the Black Square. Other things that were becoming, they were sort of leaving the representational form. And Stalin wanted to keep it very clear and basically so he can centralize the art, and the art style was changed to realism. He didn't want any avant-garde where people didn't understand what they were looking at, because most of the people back then were uneducated peasants and workers from this town, so they wouldn't be able to understand works done by a few intellectuals. And so he brought it back to basically to use the art is the ideologically refined product of totalitarian thinking. And back then, Stalin said that artists are little engineers of the soul. And so the soul would be what Stalin would say it would be. And he personally looked all over the artworks that were created. He watched the plays, he watched the films, he read the novels, and it had to go through his approval. He was involved in every aspect of art. Either the artwork will either be approved by him or it would be condemned. And if the work was condemned, the artists would easily can become a subject to persecution. They could be sent to gulags or be killed. And so the sort of the shaping of the art and culture began then with Stalin, where he used that as basically a tool, a weapon to brainwash the masses and have them believe in a sort of this myth of beautiful communism, that communism can offer them hope and bring them all the things that they always want to have in their lives.
Okay, so basically from that point on, art was just used as a means to further the communist agenda in Russia.
Well, yes, and I think it was also more because just having the propaganda of communism was not enough. So their communism had to be this ideology of communism had to penetrate every aspect of lives of people in Soviet Union, and primarily there were the workers and the peasants. Stalin basically it was a very difficult time in history for Russia because Stalin murdered so many intelligentsia, people who had any sort of different ideas, or they wanted some sort of democracy or freedom or any other thoughts that besides that what Stalin had in mind. They were wiped out, sent to gulags. It's thousands and thousands of millions of people were murdered. They were not, there was no intelligence anymore. Basically, he wiped them out completely. Millions of intelligent people were murdered, and you were left with peasants and workers who didn't really understand the art, didn't really care for the art, had no idea what the art is for. And so, yeah. And then it has, for example, the golden leaf, that they'll strip the golden leaf and then use it as a money and to buy some food maybe for the family or whatever, and the rest of it just would be destroyed or thrown away.
Okay, so before getting into how the Soviet Union was basically destroying all these churches, architecture, everything that had this from the past is basically, as you said, they're changing their names of all these cities to to these communist leaders like Leningrad, Stalingrad, things like that.
Right.
So they were basically changing every part of society to fit their Marxist plans, right? It seems like everything, from art. It's not like where we see it now, where we're in the United States, where people have some room to express themselves, in the free world.
Right. There's no discourse going on. So the art was used as a tool to dumb down the populace, to re-educate them what really art is, basically a state propaganda, and that was a tool. It was, after revolution, the art primarily, and after, especially when Stalin came to power, it was primarily about representation of Stalin and Lenin, and um, you know such as sacred things that your Mother Earth or your father, all these elements of family or tradition that were taken in and somehow twisted into become the tool for the Communist Party and its propaganda. So then you'll see a lot of public art because, as I said, there was not like there's galleries and museums everywhere. It was very, you had to go to just only few cities that would show, artwork, so display them. Um, and then the public art was either on the buildings because the box were the great place to put such things. On the side of the building, they'll have different slogans, and most of the time, it was just this slogan, reinforcement of values of the Communist Party, and so forth. So, the interesting thing is, what surprised me is that there's few places, few things that Russians, were known for, like the onion domes in, church in Moscow, or the Hermitage Museum that was established and founded by Catherine the Great in 1764 in St. Petersburg. They still remain. I think somehow they knew that they would have to have something left for the future generations.
Do you think the art style adopted by the Soviet Union reflects their understanding of human life?
What I'd like to reiterate is that main aspect of the communist rule is to get rid of God, get rid of anything that is related to divine, heavenly inspired, right? And have um, instead they replaced it with the Darwin's theory of evolution and believe in that fittest will survive, and that man has to sort of fight with the heavens and with the skies to win. So man has the control and man has the power, and that was reflected in the arts. That basically the art world and art was manipulated to at first, and then it later just reflected the state of this soulless, no God kind of populace that has no really moral guidance. They have no um, gauge by which to judge what is really good, what is really bad. So only thing they have is what or whatever the Communist Party tells them.
So, what is your impression of Russia now?
And it's kind of, I'm saying it's changed my career, become really whoever I wanted to. If I work hard and if I study and do whatever it is required for whatever the path I choose to. You can't really have that in Russia. There's limitations there. The whole system, even today, I have family there. They still live in St. Petersburg, and then we often talk. I have my sister there and parents, and it's the same thing. You have government, but it changed name of things, but it's the same bureaucracy. It's the same sort of this numbness. People don't really care for other people. You sort of go back to your room and you make your room shiny, but whole world is filthy, dirty, and nobody cares about it. And there's this sort of like this godless, you know, soulless kind of culture. And now they're busy, they're busy going to doing other things that modern people do. And they don't really sit down. A lot of people don't really sit down to think about why they're here, what's this life is about, to ponder about, really heartfelt things about the God and about our souls and about our existence. Like Russia is known for, old Russia, known for, I think, genius writers like I absolutely love and adore Leo Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and they've really looked inside the person's soul, and they were able to communicate that truth about the existence and how it is miserable for all of us, but then we find this connection with the divine, and then we strive to be better. We try to change ourselves. We try to make our lives something that would be reminiscent what could be in the heavens, and bring that into our daily lives. So all these aspects are, they're no longer there. It's been numbed down with modernity.
So, in your art education in the United States, it seems that our colleges and institutions are pushing the same values in the modern aesthetic we've seen in the Soviet Union. Would that be correct?
I think I'd like to just conclude that the the power of art is really enormous, and the education system that delivers that, the art education, is very important element in our society. And good art can rectify the human heart and connect us back to our origin, which is, I believe, is heavens, where we come from. So you see that when you go to see these big giants like Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Raphael. And when you look at their works, they are so beautiful and they're so inspiring, and they elevate your soul, they elevate your morality, and they bring you back to they return you back to tradition and give you faith that there's going to be another renaissance in our world.
Yeah, because with traditional art, it seems like it's more hopeful. Do you get that experience? Or, there's like a continuation, like you feel like more uplifted by it.
Yes, and then also I believe, from my own experience, when I start to learn traditional ways of art making, what it does is it refines my own character. Because when I was in school, this spontaneous sort of, like go and paint whatever you feel like it, emotional state is very encouraged, and a lot of times, we possess both a demon nature and a Buddha nature, and so um, when you paint like that or when you work like that, what happens is a lot of negative, bad things come out to the surface. With traditional art form, why I'm keep saying the skill-based training is that it's the same. You have to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, until you become this expert. And so you draw, and then you draw the same hand, and then you paint this hand, and then you draw it again in a different way. So you that's a lot of work. It's a arduous daily work that requires a lot of attention, and it's tiring, and you work for 8, 10 more hours sometimes a day to be able to achieve the results that you get to see in the traditional artworks, in museum quality. Without that, you won't be able to do it, because if you want to portray a human form, then you have to really refine your own character. So in the process of learning the traditional, going undergoing the traditional training in arts, you also refine your own character, and I think you purify that part of you that is, as we all have, the part is not that's not very good, and that gets smaller and smaller, and then your heart becomes more pure, and it reaches up to the heavens to get inspiration. Mm. I remember when I was learning about Michelangelo, and then I watched this documentary. There was an interesting scene there where he was painting Sistine Chapel, and then he was pressured by the Pope to finish it, and then he says, "I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I don't have it. I need more time." And then he was saying, "No, you have to." I think he had to do main plate there. He had to paint, and he wasn't inspired, and so he had to go through a lot of work and discard a lot of his sketches and go through a lot of preparation, and he wasn't satisfied. And so he went out, and there's like this scene in the movie. He went out and he looked up to the sky, and then he sees these clouds, and then they form into this form of the father and a son reaching to each other and touching each other's hand. And that was heavenly, divinely inspired. And he went back to the chapel and then, painted that plate. And everybody knows that. I mean, it's like the iconic imagery, it's absolutely timeless. And it's still so inspirational because it touches your heart. So, there is something to be said to the following traditions and following this heavenly, realm for people to be able to bring back these faith and hope for the humanity. The art is the gift from the divine, and profound art is the attempt to emulate and display the beauty of heavens in the human world. So is an artist inspiration, and the artist's inspiration comes from the divine, from God. If we take Renaissance, I know a lot of your listeners can relate to this. People know Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. Their masterpieces are still considered timeless, classical art pieces. And a great example to give is the Metropolitan Museum here in New York City had. They just recently, I think a couple of years ago, added a collection, new wing with the modern art. And interestingly enough, there was no attendance there. And when last year, I believe it was, they brought works by Michelangelo, and it was a record attendance. There were people there every day coming from all over the country to see the works of Michelangelo. So that just bespeaks on behalf of traditional art and how timeless it is.
Join us tomorrow to hear how the Soviet Union exported communism, at the ready in establishing communist regimes in other nations. Once again, I'm Vanessa Rios Gomez. Thanks for listening.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.